Next to why can't I lose weight? This question of why can't I gain muscle mass or why am I having difficulty gaining muscle mass is the question I hear most often from people that are going to the gyms. Dr. Miller with a few things to think about. Some of them are obvious. Some of them maybe you haven't thought about that might get you moving in the direction you want to in terms of seeing the change in muscle mass that you're looking for. Number one is nutrition. And this one seems a little silly. Like, well, of course nutrition matters, but sometimes we get in this rut of, you've maybe seen on my other video on good versus, better and better versus great. There's a difference between these different words. So you could be eating okay, but be under proteined and be plateaued as a result of not eating enough protein. So where you are in terms of your, how long you've been training is going to determine how much protein you eat as well. The longer you've been training, and if you want to see more improvements in muscle mass, and to a certain level, of course, increasing protein intake is going to be something you can look at and say, well, maybe I can take in another, 18 grams a day throughout the day, and see if that gets you moving in the right direction. Or when you look at how much you're taking now, and you're like, well, I'm only at roughly 1.7 grams per kilo body weight per day. Well, that may not be high enough anymore to see significant gains, and 2.0 will be a better number to work towards. So the point is that part of nutrition messed up. The meal timing may be messed up. You may not be taking enough carbs, and in your workouts, or you're dying out in your training sessions faster than you should because you haven't properly fueled your training sessions. You're not taking advantage of the metabolic window, the 2 hour window, which has been argued and supported against. But in terms of maximizing this idea of muscle full and allowing the muscle to accrue as much muscle protein synthesis as possible, timing can be a big deal. So if you're not eating for 3 hours after you work out, these are things you could look at. Okay, volume, and certainly we can go in deeper nutrition, but those are just some general things to start with. Volume. Are you increasing the volume over time when it comes to your training? And when it comes to skeletal muscle hypertrophy, this seems to be the main driver of all our exercise variables. Now I put intensity on here, intensity volume interaction. So if you've been working out at 3x12 for a long time and you're not noticing any change, well, maybe it's time to increase the volume, of course, but also look at, maybe you've just been working 3x12 in the 12 rep range too long. Maybe it'd be a good idea to do a couple weeks or a cycle down closer to a 6 even, and then scaling all the way up to 20 at some point. Okay, so basically it's kind of like going up and down a piano, right? You're hitting every note as you go, and in so doing, you're going to fatigue the muscle fibers perhaps in a different way, some in a way that may be a little more metabolically challenging, and in a way that may be more tension challenging through heavier loads and more sets. The bottom line is that volume is improving and increasing, but it's happening at different methods of the volume being increased, whether through its more metabolic means or it could be more through the tension of the load, and creating a little bit more of a stimulus that way. So look at what your training is doing. Are you in a rut? Are you increasing in volume? That would be the thing to look at. And if you're doing things right, you'll look back and be like, man, I used to do 3 sets of 12. I thought that was a killer for my chest work. Now I'm doing 8 sets, of 15, and that seems something manageable, right? And not worked in here, and that volume is the failure, not to failure, but that can be managed properly, and has to be managed properly in order to see progressions in volume at a steady rate. Exercise variety. If you've been doing the same lateral raise for the last 18 weeks, might be time to change up your lateral raise exercise. Do something different, especially in your supportive exercises, like your single joint exercises. That changes things, even if it's changing a stance or changing a grip. Grab the back of the dumbbell handle. I mean, there's a myriad of ways to change a training stimulus, and that could help start to trigger growth. It may not seem like a big deal, but over time, it is going to be a big deal. And kind of playing off of that, also joint stress is a little bit different from each exercise, and so that can help you keep training and progressing through the volume as well. Now, don't change too quickly. Every 2 weeks, if you're just starting a new exercise, don't do that. It might take 8 weeks before you feel like you finally got a handle on it and you've built some progression into it. But as you get more comfortable with some of these exercises, you could switch every 4 weeks because you know what you do on the lat pull down, regular grip lat pull down. Now you can easily slide into that exercise again for 4 weeks, at a certain rep range, and know what the load should be roughly, and your technique is spot on. Other stresses, if you have a lot of life stress, work stress, you're not sleeping. And that's goes hand in hand with nutrition. Don't think that I'm not sleeping a lot, but my nutrition's on point. That is affecting growth. And it's either directly or through not managing stress properly, right? All these things kind of meld together. If you're a stressed out person in general, it's going to be harder for you potentially to gain muscle mass if you're not managing stress and sleep properly. And so, if you really want to maximize growth, you got to look at these other factors and be honest when you're going through stretches where it's really difficult and life is pulling at you in different directions. You might just have the maintenance for a while and understand that you probably won't gain muscle mass during that period. You get body comp changes in terms of fat loss, but it might be hard to change muscle mass just because you can't push the volume because you don't have the extra stress reserve in order to do that, and your sleep has been affected, etc. And then the last one, of course, it could be that you're just not waiting long enough. I mean, building muscle mass takes time, and that's many times when you have these before and after pictures, which I think are fantastic, people are like, well, how do I look super jacked like her? Well, you got to, or him. Well, it takes time. They may have already had muscle and they just lean down, and so you're seeing the definition of their muscles. Like, oh wow, that looked like they put on a ton of muscle. They probably already had the muscle. They just leaned down. And so if you're looking at just gaining muscle, though, it's going to take some time. You're talking about months to years to really see like significant physique changes. If you're talking about somebody who's natural, it's going to take some time. Okay, so you might just need to, if you're looking at your program and nutrition and your other stress, and you're like, hey, all these things are on point, and I'm making sure I'm working in variety in my repetition ranges and my exercises, and I'm not seeing real steady growth. It may be that you are seeing steady growth and that you just are not noticing it. It's that subtle. And over the course of months to years, you're going to look back on some old pictures and be like, oh man, I never realized how skinny I was back then, or I never realized how underdeveloped I was in my lats or whatever. And now look at me because I've been sticking with it for years. Okay. That's probably of all these variables, the most important, up front. All these other things are important. Of course, they're supportive of this idea of consistency. But if you don't do it consistently, just like anything else, you can't expect to see gains. All right. Hopefully that's helpful. I know it can be incredibly frustrating in this journey, but anything worth doing that is done correctly is just going to take time. I'm sure there's some exceptions out there, but it's going to take time. Stay in it, rotate the exercise so you don't get monotony. Enjoy the journey. Hopefully you enjoy training. That's part of this whole thing is in just enjoying going to the gym and grabbing some weights and moving around. In a structured way, of course, but the point is, the gym is a wonderful place. I think we all could relate to that. Find what works for you in terms of programming. There's lots of ways to do it. As long as it's a progression increase, you can see steady results.